So, hi everybody. Happy Friday. Who knew? Like one of the craziest weeks we've ever been through. Just a little bit of intro of how this came about and who I am. I am an org transformation consultant. I work with lots of different types of companies, big, small, startup, legacy. And I have been working with a remote company myself, a software company, for about 7 years, and also coach and consult to remote companies. So when it became clear that we were going to be really all moving remote, I thought, gosh, I bet a lot of people are really struggling. Let's see if I can just do a little, quick and dirty nuts and bolts. So I put that together a week ago, and I've been doing it several times a day, just as people have heard about it and asked about it. And so I think now what I'm going to probably do is just create small chunks of content the next few weeks that are just based on what people say they're looking for. So just let me know after this if it's helpful and what your issues are, so that we can work together. I think that self care is going to be one of the biggest things that we're all going to learn about in terms of how we stay centered during this tough time. So I'm going to suggest that we start by putting our feet on the ground. And there are a lot of things we could do, but I'm going to just suggest three big breaths just to try to get us a little centered. So breathe in and out. In and out. In and out. Great. Now, we all do different things for self care. I have been mostly with large groups in this gathering, but we're sort of a small group. And so I think just we will actually do a quick check in personally, as I've been doing it in the chat function. So if we just want to say our names, where we work, and what you do for self care, that would be awesome. And I'm just going to call out to who I see on the screen, and then we'll see if we've covered everybody. So Carrie, you're first on my screen.
Oh, okay.
So you unmute and just say quick hello.
All right. Hi, my name is Carrie Taylor, and I work with Preserve Rhode Island. And I guess the last few days, I've been trying to set up a routine as a key for self-care most recently.
Fantastic. Jim?
Hello, I'm Jim Van. I'm with Logicom. We basically support startups and very small businesses with IT services. If you ever worked for a large corporation and dealt with the support center, well, that's what we do. So we're also going a little crazy setting up remote services for clients. So haven't quite figured it all out yet. So that's interesting.
Great. Toonie, I think we do know you, but you can still check in with self care.
Oh, hi. I don't know. Some people maybe. I'm the executive director of Venture Cafe District Hall. Providence District Hall is our beautiful 8,000 square feet of space that we're not in right now, even though it looks like it in our backgrounds. And Venture Cafe is our programming. Obviously, we've pivoted to 100% virtual programming for the unforeseeable future. And that's okay, because we were always planning on doing some virtual programming. So we're trying to have fun with it, and we're innovators. But having said that, my whole team, I'm very mindful, we've all been working really hard the past 3 weeks, actually. And I would say it's been full 3 weeks for me of many, many video calls. And this week in particular, I'm finding it harder because I work probably an average of 12 hours a day, and to be on a screen and video calls for at least 8 to 9 hours a day, focused without being able to take breaks. It's been hard, and I'm someone who understands the importance of self-care. So I'm trying to take breaks. I have a park right here. So I have my dog, so I'm trying to use him to remind me to get outside.
Great. Thanks, Toonie. Janice, want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Janice, and in full disclosure, I'm MJ's sister. I've been working remotely for 20 years, and I like to go for walks for self-care and do yoga.
Thanks. Sydney, you want to unmute? Great.
I'm Sydney. I'm the marketing coordinator at Venture Cafe, and self-care is great. And I think we all need a lot more of it in life. I agree with everything everybody said.
Great. And I'm not sure if I'm going to pronounce your name right. Casa?
I was just going to say that's probably me. Kasia.
Kasia, thank you.
Think of Asia with a K. I also work with the Venture Cafe team. I am usually managing the client rentals of our space for their meetings and events, but in that we're closed for the obvious reason. I am pivoting to supporting marketing efforts, including our website. I have been kind of glued to this chair. I think we're all spending a lot more time on our computers than we normally do. We're used to being in and about the space and moving furniture and helping people, and so it's been a little awkward to really be on our screens and computers this often. So I also have a dog like Toonie, and so I've been really trying to walk him more and just spend more time outside with him because it's a great distraction.
Great, thanks. Beth?
Hello, I'm Beth, and I am a friend of Janice's. And I think we've met before, MJ, at some family events. I'm director of access. Sorry?
You're in DC?
Yes.
Yeah, great.
So I'm director of Access Smithsonian at the Smithsonian Institution. And I spent a lot of time on the computer in the past week. I have not really been thinking yet about self-care strategies, so that is something I need to do.
Good. And Kathleen?
Hello, everyone. I'm Kathleen. I work for Trilix. And for self-care, I've been trying to focus on getting outside. I have a nice trail in my neighborhood in the woods, so trying to do some forest bathing and get outside for a walk when I can.
Great. Avi, we did such a great job of organizing me sharing, and now it's disabled. So one of the things we're learning is that sometimes there are tech glitches with some of our best plans. So it's not letting me, but you have the presentation. I guess that would be one option.
Do you want to try right now?
Sure, I'll try again. Now it is.
Great.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much. But yes, there are tech glitches, and I just love that we're also learning to process them,
Yep. So great to start. I wanted to say, first of all, that it's not usual that I do a presentation where I'm just, talking, but I tried to put content together and spit it out. So I am going to do that for a bit. And then I will take off the presentation, and you can take off your mute, and we'll just ask questions and have more of a conversation. I will say, in terms of video, there's lots of research that shows that people are much more engaged, and a lot of the relational things that are so important in terms of this strange time are better with video. I saw a lot of people weren't using video. So in general, we know that the video capability of video conferencing is really important. I will say that having learned so much about being remote over the years, there's some circumstances that are just going to be different in this period of time where we're all home based. And one is that we're all feeling, stressed by being so much on the computer. So one tip is to switch to your phone. So, maybe if you're on your phone, you can be more mobile. And the other is maybe we're not going to be always on video, and that will allow you to, be walking around or maybe walking the dog and listening at the same time. So just a couple of tips. We did intros together because it was a small group, but just to note that there's the chat feature at the bottom. And I was just on a conference with a couple hundred people from around the globe who are trying to figure out how we can support people and organizations in this work in this time. And people use the chat to do a check-in and then to ask questions and just to share tips. So chat can be a wonderful feature. And I also am finding that people are just learning so many tips, either what they already use or new ideas that are coming up. So feel free to share your tips with each other. We did our self-care, and I can't say enough about this, and it came up in the conference that I was in, that this may be, the most important thing. And I think we all know that normally when we're caring for others, but in this particular time, it's going to be just super important. So what am I going to cover? Three main things. One is how to communicate and collaborate using digital tools, given that we're all remote. And four main buckets: sort of real-time communication like we're on now, asynchronous, which is, things like messaging or email, sharing content and staying organized, and thinking visually. And then two other topics, super briefly: engagement, how to stay engaged yourself as well as your teams, and then adapting as we are learning what's working and not in these unusual times. And just to make the point that we're physically at a distance, and we actually need to be socially more connected than ever. So a couple tips I even heard this morning. One was lots of one-on-ones sort of in between the bigger meetings, and just remembering that checking in with people and, even social time, the tendency, because we're all a little OD'd on being on the computer, is to not do a check-in with the group that's more, how's everybody doing, but that's more important than ever. Just a quick note that as some of you noted, people have been working remotely for years, and so we know a lot about what works and what doesn't. And people generally are very happy, very productive, very reliable working remotely. And there's lots of data about that. So I think being confident that we can figure this out, I think, is really important. Of course, it is a very different context, especially, people have young children at home, or people are going to get sick, care for others who are sick. So much of what we know works is great. And then, as somebody said, we're figuring out new best practices as we go every day. I think these are probably the four most important tips that I can offer at a sort of big picture level. One is that we're going to need to reestablish priorities, and the pacing is going to vary. Sometimes it might be by the day. Hopefully, as things settle down a little bit, it might be, by the week. But what we can do and can't do, what the people we serve need, all these things are changing in ways we had not anticipated. So depending on what role you're in, either as a team or if you're leading a team or organization, you need to think about, are people clear together what the priorities are? Similar is roles. This is an opportunity where people will need to move beyond their narrow job descriptions. Some of their work might not exist for a while. It's an opportunity for others to step in with skills that maybe you didn't even know they have. So it's a chance to really invite people to try on some new ways to contribute. And, that's a positive about, a time that's very much in upheaval. Norms are going to be important, especially as we work through when can we all be together if we're being pulled in lots of different directions. What are protocols for being on a video conference, or in terms of turnaround times for content? So establishing norms and then reevaluating. And finally, decision rights. Like, maybe this is an opportunity to give teams that are closer to customers more decision rights. And then how are we going to stay coordinated and make sure we're managing budgets and things like that, especially since for many of us, income has dwindled. So the first thing I'd say is setting expectations about when you're going to connect real time. I have been suggesting a daily stand-up first thing in the morning, whatever first thing means. I mean, it could be 9 or 10, depending on what competing pressures you have. But doing a check-in, stand-ups were designed to be so quick that you didn't mind standing. So like 10 minutes or so, depending on the size of your team, clarifying priorities, checking in to make sure people are well and that circumstances haven't changed, and then clarifying, sort of what's on deck for the day and where people might feel blocked, and can people on the team help unblock them. And then similarly, I recommend a checkout at the end of the day to just see how the day went, see where people got stuck, and a little bit to figure out what could happen, what could you do better tomorrow. So in most of our teams, we do these kinds of check-ins in a deeper way every 2 weeks, and we do a daily check-in, but you're going to have to gauge for your organization and your situation what the pacing is. I think this is a time we're going to have to be super compassionate about the issues people are dealing with, and there was a leader who talked about how he handled his company after September 11th, and that he and his co-leaders, co-founders, decided to really focus on the business and how can we all, stay together to make this business survive. And in retrospect, he said they really should have started with the humanity and, how is everybody and processing, and that just the posture from the very beginning really changed the whole course of how employees did in those difficult weeks and months after September 11th. So I think just checking in with people at a really human level is super important. And then finally, this is a time where we can step back and think about new ways to work, think about what we're learning, and think about, how it may be better than what we've been doing. One of the speakers in the conference I was in this morning said he's skeptical that people will carry these forward in a robust way, but he said one of his suggestions is to be jotting down what's working better, and then once we get back into a normal situation, which is probably going to be somewhat of a new normal, to try to carry forward at least 1 or 2 or 3 things that you've learned, or new habits or new ways of working, not to get carried away with too much, but to really try to take the best of those and bring them forward. And if you want to know about the photo, which you can look online and see beautiful live images of starlings in murmuration. These are birds that flock in these enormous groups, and it's like a dance watching them. And they just follow 3 basic rules to stay together and be able to move together. So this is the issue of norms. My recommendation in this difficult time is to have just a few key norms and have them be very simple and very clear. This is a team charter. If your team doesn't have a charter, this is a great time to get into that practice. So you can use a simple form like this just to make sure everybody's on the same page about purpose, priorities, changes in terms of accountabilities or decision rights, and how are you measuring. And this is a time with measurement that I would say progress over perfection is probably an important rule. So you don't want to be too persnickety about numbers, how we are maybe often in a more typical situation, but know that what you're working on is moving forward and making good progress.
Hi, MJ. Can you just double check to make sure you're sharing your screen?
Oh, it's not coming through. Did it share initially and now it's not, or it never was sharing?
It shared when we tested it earlier. I just realized, like,
you're not seeing the screen?
No, you're describing things so well that I, Perfect.
Now it's on?
Yeah.
Okay, well, what I'll do is I'll just zip through the slides so you can sort of see what I was talking about, and you're going to get the presentation, so then you'll, so this is some content about the self-care that you'll get. This is the agenda, some Gallup data about remote teams. These are the 4 points I just went over, and the beautiful photo of murmuration. This is a form for a team charter, and I got to the user manual to me. So user manual to me is something I use when I'm bringing new people or teams together. And it's a way on the front end to share some of our differences and sort of even quirky behaviors. And it's a way to try to minimize misunderstandings that often build up over time and lead to conflict, because we all have different habits and tendencies. So I used this with a team member on a project last year where he really was not a planner at all, and I really wanted to do much more planning, and so we talked that through at the very beginning in terms of doing this conversation, and that when we had some tension around that, it really helped to have gone through this. This is something that is sort of a template that some folks came up with and spread around the globe, these questions, but I suggest that you could use any questions. So in this particular time, if you have teams that you're working with or even new clients, figuring out what are the things that might be helpful to get out on the table, like what's your home situation? What are your constraints? Are you dealing with children? How can I support you? These kinds of conversations. And one of the things I'm talking to people about is that if there's people that you have conflict with, this is a time you actually might do a reboot. So you could use something like this where normally it would feel awkward to figure out how you were going to get at the conflict, but you can just say, these are such unusual circumstances. We've all gone remote. Why don't we take 15 minutes? Each of us can answer some questions, and then we can do a conversation about those to figure out how we can work best together given this craziness. And maybe you can surface some of the things that have been getting in the way or possibly misunderstood in the past. So in terms of video, since hearing the introductions, I get the sense that many of you have already been using Zoom or some other video conferencing. So I'm not going to say tons about this, except to say, again, that the video feature is really important. And if you feel like you need to use it selectively, then choosing times where sort of it's more content-rich conversation in terms of something that you're working through conflict or strategy or some of the tougher stuff, then probably using video is going to add value just so you can really gauge people's body language. You can hear each other's voice. It can be reassuring to connect seeing the video. So, you'll have to figure that out as a team. And I think that's the level that it's really best. In terms of tools, we're on Zoom. It's clear that many of you already use Zoom. Here's some other tools if you feel like you're trying to figure out what tools to use. I love Zoom because of the quality. There's a breakout room feature. The recording's great. So that's one of why I like it. But I have a list of other options and their features as well. In terms of some tips, again, I think many of you are probably familiar with this, but check the technology. Avi and I did check, and then somehow it blipped. But things are blipping quite a bit right now because of pressure on the system. So I think the key is just doing the best we can, and then trying to triage when we're in the moment. People are very understanding right now because many people are new, and we're doing the best we can. Check your background. People recommend dressing professionally, and we may be dressing more casually being at home, but the rule of thumb is not to wear your pajamas. Start and end on time. I think that's especially important given that people are doing all these different remote conversations. Introduce everyone, obviously, if you're the same team that's been working together, but I think people are going to find they're going to move on to new projects as some people get sick and, things shuffle around. So don't forget the basics of onboarding people. Check your guidelines. So you'll find as people get more fluent with the tools that you'll often have multiple tools going on at the same time. So just make sure people understand how you're using them. Part of the video, keeping the video is to minimize multitasking, which we know is not very effective. So, a lot of times people, put mute and take off video so they can, also be cooking. But that's one of these things that now maybe that's going to be the way you can participate because of the unusual circumstances. So that's one of those that there's sort of an asterisk of, in general, we don't think multitasking is very productive, but in this moment, it may be the best you can do. All right, asynchronous communication is all the things that we do on our own rhythm, our own calendar, like email. And the biggest thing that I'm finding is that many organizations are using email as their internal communication, and email is terrible for internal communication because it builds up, it doesn't follow a threaded conversation, and this is a real opportunity for your organization if you're not already to consider messaging. And there are lots of different messaging tools. Many of the companies that I work with are using Slack these days. Microsoft Teams also has messaging. Most of the big systems have messaging. Some international teams seem to use WhatsApp much more than other apps. But if you're not using messaging, I would recommend that you do a trial and you see if it's a way for your team to actually be more transparent, more aligned, more productive. So a couple of the reasons: one is people are more brief writing in messaging. You can set up channels and topics so people opt into them. So it's a pull tactic of people go to the information they need as opposed to push, which is people rely on me to get the information to them. And different topics are tracked all in one place. So when you need to know about a certain project that you're working on, you know exactly where to go for that. I've also been sharing about Lumio, which is a software company that I work with. I'm on the board there, and that's a decision tool. So it's specifically set up to help people move from discussion to decision. So I just wanted to do a little commercial. I would be remiss if I didn't. So if you want to know anything more about Lumio, you can reach out to me about that. So sharing content and staying organized. Again, larger companies are already probably on systems like a Google or Microsoft Teams, G Suite, Basecamp. But this is geared a little bit to organizations that might be smaller and not have strong online systems. In Rhode Island, Microsoft is just doing a deal with Teams. I'm a little cautious about it. They're giving 6 months during this time to organizations, but it's pretty expensive. It's very robust. It's an excellent system, but it's also quite expensive. So I just hesitate for small operations to take that on and get used to it and love it, and then find out that it's really not affordable for the long term. So there are cheaper options. I'm a really big fan of Trello, which is no cost or low cost, really, really robust, really easy to use. They also are a remote company and have fantastic tools about being remote, as does Basecamp. And in terms of why to be on a shared system, make sure that with documents, there's one source of truth. You're working on one document. It increases transparency. When we get released from our home base, you can have access from anywhere, and of course improves alignment, accountability, coordination. Some of the hardest work probably to do online, but it is possible, is to be more visual. There are lots of good tools that are designed for designers. Most of them are started by designers, and I think they're going to take a little bit more time for some of us to get comfortable, but they are pretty easy to use. They're great in terms of moving ideas. They're great in terms of synthesizing, and all sorts of different options. I'm a fan of Mural. It's quite easy to use so that you can do your more creative work together. I use Canva with some clients as well. Some of the people who participated earlier this week suggested Coggle and Klaxoon. I'm not familiar with those tools, but I think what I would recommend is, if you're in a bigger organization, that you find out who in the organization is maybe already using these tools, and see if people can do a tutorial to bring them in and be a resource to everybody else. And I think in general, doing buddy systems that way for some of these tools is going to be really effective. And I'm just going to be super brief about being engaged and adaptive, and then we're going to open up for questions. Just on the engagement, if you're working with a team or a bigger organization, or even in terms of customers and clients. You're going to have to check in with folks about hardware and software compatibility. And I know that there is a lot of work being done on this, but that survey work, hopefully you've already done that at this point. And obviously, if you're going to be working on tools together, you need to be able to have the shared software. Bandwidth is definitely getting strained. The companies are working on that. And some of the tips are to try to do things slightly off hours and make sure that there aren't too many people in a household working at the same time on high bandwidth. I know a lot of the teens are spending their time, playing video games, or younger kids are going to be back in school online. So we're going to need to be sort of monitoring that at the home level. Obviously, for the video component, you may need, you would need a webcam, and some of us have older laptops that don't have them, but most of your phones will work for that, and Zoom, for instance, works great on the phone. Headphones, I think, are probably something that if you don't already have them, will come in handy, especially if you're in a household with many people. You're going to probably find a sort of small area that you're going to call your workplace. And if there's background noise and other people around, you're going to want those headphones. And finally, we're all going to be concerned about security and privacy. Your company very likely has a virtual private network that encrypts information and makes that possible, but that is not necessarily something you've been using at home. So I would recommend that you check in with your workplace to try to assess security and privacy for the information you're sharing. So in terms of staying engaged, we need to acknowledge that we're all going to have ups and downs on a daily basis, and certainly, Avi, you talked about weeks, but they're actually talking about months that we may be home. So we're really going to have to, think about managing ourselves for a longer haul. So I think the first key is just knowing yourself, figuring out what your needs are and the needs of your family, and managing that. Certainly the self-care and pacing yourself. So I think that's super important. I think in terms of your team, your network, your customers, your stakeholders, the key is to ask. If it's a smaller group, you want to do those in a meeting context or maybe one-on-one. Obviously, if you're talking about bigger groups, surveys and polls, I'm a big fan of Ask Me Anything sessions. So that's a session where, you just get people together and invite them. If there's a leader or others in the network that might have answers to a variety of questions, then people can just put those out there. Creating a schedule for the day and sharing it with the relevant people, your family, as well as your colleagues. Over communicating is more important now than ever. Paying attention to the isolation, so people are realizing they need to make dedicated time for just the socializing. So you're hearing about remote drinks and dance parties, and somebody said they were doing an open space of poetry sharing. So making the space so people feel more connected emotionally, socially, and as humans. Talked a little bit about having a boundary both of space and time between work and home. And finally, lots and lots of breaks. We know that people shouldn't be sitting really for more than 30 minutes at a time. So you can just do stretch breaks. You can do a walk around the block. You can go get some food. You can connect with the kids, call up a buddy to say, hey. So all these kinds of things to break from the sedentary aspect of work. And finally, just this is a time when I think we're going to need to be super adaptive and try a lot of things. I thought it was great when someone said, we're all making up new best practices. So the steps to that, for one, is making sense of what you're learning. And so that's noticing and bringing in different people in your circle to help you sort of make sense of what makes sense to do, what are even priorities. One of the things we're already seeing is that, we know this, when people are stressed, things like blind spots are sort of more prevalent. People's emotions are frayed. So people who tend to be more vulnerable, people who are on the margins, generally are suffering more. So when you are doing your sense making, I really recommend a pause to think about that and think about what that means. You know, of course, this is at the personal, family, community level, but as well in the organization. And so then in terms of interpreting what to do about that, I think this is a great time to try out experiments or pilots. So think about small ways we can begin to try new things. You know, some folks said that their work was super slowing down, so they're trialing some new content creation or trialing video, which I think is one of the medium that we're going to find works really, really well while we're all remote. So thinking about what can you trial that will help your organization to you know, step into this context as opposed to sort of step away. So with that, I'm going to take off the presentation and go back to video. And I invite you, we're small groups, so I'd say people should take off the mics really for, you know, fluent conversation, and just I invite people to ask questions. What's on your mind?
I just moved onto my yoga block. I don't know if you can see that.
Great.
Because
I
couldn't
I
share
lost the
anymore.
screen for a minute.
Good. Yay.
So I found it interesting, MJ, about you had mentioned about visual stuff in one of your slides, which you know, I actually don't know a lot about, in spite of the fact I've been doing this stuff for a long time. I mean, I know about screen sharing, but it seems like there's a lot of things that you can now do with visuals that you couldn't do in the past.
There is, and a lot of them have been designed by designers, for designers primarily, but I know in terms of facilitation, ideation, working through choices, all of that, if you're stuck remote, is really, really key for a lot of work. So they're good tools. That there are a number that are fairly straightforward. What I recommend, again, is like scan your system and see if there's someone who's already maybe using them, whether they're in the public department or, you know, they may just, you know, so many of us have hobbies and are doing things on the side. So somebody may know an app to recommend and be happy to do some how-to sessions. You know, a couple of those sessions work well. I mentioned at another session, you know, a lot of sort of mentoring, coaching, buddy work is great during this time. So if we're using tools that we're not familiar with and it's a little harder for us, then buddy up, find someone who is more comfortable and ask them, you know, if they'd be a support for when you get stuck. So I think some of that.
Yeah, that's it's interesting. I'm thinking about I consult for you know, a number of different places that are more or less in the incubator space. And for one of them, for example, is over in Paris. And one of the things that I was thinking about was it would be really nice to have a virtual cocktail napkin. Because some of the best ideas are scribbled down on cocktail napkins, at least in my world. And that's kind of what I'm interested in, is seeing something like that where people could collaborate that way.
Yeah, absolutely. That's out there. I was on this week with someone who does improv, and she's been figuring out how to teach her improv and do improv online. So I think some of the tools exist, and some is going to be, this is going to be a super creative time for us to learn how to work together in all sorts of different ways.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I think that a lot of what's happening out there right now is actually going to drive some really creative things out. I think it's going to be a very, you know, in some ways it'll be a very cool time.
I agree, Jim.
I have a quick question. I work a lot with other collaborators when I do in-person education different types of classes and courses. And now not being able to be in the same room with another person, are there any of these tools or programs you recommend when 2 people or 2 to 3 people are hosting a webinar or group?
I can't think why Zoom doesn't work for that.
Mhm.
I think it works really well.
Mhm.
You know, you can again, this conference I was on this morning, there were 3 hosts in 3
Mhm.
different locations, and they were organizing this massive conference. And Zoom does break down into small groups. It's another feature, so it's a higher level of subscription. You know,
Mhm.
the basic subscription doesn't do that, but you can break down so that you can have the collaborators, and then if there are 3 of you, you know, and you each want to lead a smaller discussion, you can do that within the context of Zoom.
Okay, great. And then I know this one was hosted by Eventbrite as far as putting the word out. Do you recommend that when you have multiple collaborators, just so you can get all of the emails and invites out? Do you like that app?
I use Eventbrite. I find it works really well. And I'll tell you, one of the things that came up for me during this week is once I created this little bit of content, I just wanted to get it out to anybody it would be useful to.
Mhm.
And so I just reached out to a few collaborators like Venture Cafe or networks and offered it to people. And then they're spreading the word to their networks. Other questions?
Thank you so much, MJ.
My pleasure.